I watched my boss sign his own downfall, he just didn't know it yet. That's the thing about arrogance. It blinds you. It makes powerful people think they're untouchable, that the rules bend for them. My boss, Daniel Cross, was the living proof of that: sharp suit, sharper tongue, and a smile that could slice through glass. He ran Titan Solutions like a dictator dressed in designer cologne. And for a long time, I was his loyal soldier. My name's Ethan Cole. 28 years old, senior analyst. Well, at least, that's what my business card said. In reality, I was Daniel's problem solver, his fixer, the guy he sent to clean up the messes he made behind closed doors. Financial adjustments, strategic reallocations, a few creative reports for investors. Yet, I did it all. Not because I wanted to, but because Daniel made you believe loyalty was your only currency in his world. Titan Solutions wasn't just a company, it was Daniel's kingdom. Sleek skyscraper, marble floors, chrome elevators that reflected your ambition right back at you. Every morning, he'd walk in with that smug confidence that said he owned everyone in this building. And in a way, he did. He had this habit of calling people by the wrong name on purpose. "Evan," he'd say, smirking at me during meetings. "You've got that report ready?" I'd correct him every time, but he'd wave me off. "Ethan, Evan, whatever. You know I mean you." That was Daniel's power move, belittling you until you questioned your worth. And for a long time, I let him. Because in my mind, surviving under him meant someday becoming him. That's what everyone at Titan thought. Then came the day everything started to shift. It was a Monday morning, the kind that smelled like burnt coffee and tension. The boardroom was full: executives, department heads, and Daniel sitting at the head of the table like a king waiting for his court to applaud. He was unveiling his latest vision, Project Horizon, a multimillion-dollar expansion that promised to redefine the industry. I had helped prepare the numbers for that presentation. I knew the projections were, how do I put this, creative. The kind of creative that could get you investigated by the SEC if someone looked too closely. Daniel tapped his Mont-Blanc pen on the table, flashing that award-winning grin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Titan Solutions is about to make history." The room erupted in polite applause. Everyone smiled, but I could feel the unease under their laughter. We all knew Daniel's projects burned bright and fast like fireworks. Impressive at first glance, catastrophic in the aftermath. When the meeting ended, he called me into his glass office. He didn't even look up from his screen. "You'll handle the internal audit files for Horizon," he said, flipping through his emails. "Already done," I replied. "But I noticed some discrepancies in." He cut me off. "Discrepancies?" He looked up finally, eyes narrowing. "Ethan, the numbers are perfect. You worry too much. I'm just saying, if investors dig into the..." He laughed, leaning back in his chair. "That's why I run this place, and you run spreadsheets. Relax. No one's digging." There it was again, that arrogance. That blind, bulletproof pride. I left his office with a file in my hand and a knot in my chest. Something about those perfect numbers didn't sit right. I had seen small manipulations before, but this time, it was different. The stakes were higher. Later that week, I stayed late to finalize the quarterly report. The office was quiet except for the hum of computers and the city lights flickering through the windows. That's when I noticed an email trail buried deep in a restricted folder. A chain between Daniel and a private contractor, referencing offshore accounts and non-disclosable assets. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But curiosity, no, survival instinct got the better of me. The deeper I read, the colder my blood ran. Daniel wasn't just exaggerating figures. He was laundering company funds through shell entities disguised as partners. Millions hidden under layers of corporate jargon. And my signature was on some of those transfers. That's when I realized I wasn't his analyst. I was his shield. If the ship ever sank, I'd be the one handcuffed on the deck while he sailed away scot-free. The next morning, Daniel called me into his office again. "Big week ahead," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like we were buddies. "You've always been my right-hand man, Ethan. Don't make me regret trusting you." I smiled because in that moment, I made a silent promise. He would regret it. I walked out of his office with a new purpose. No confrontation, no outburst, no threats. Just quiet resolve. Because the best revenge isn't loud, it's patient. It's calculated. And from that day on, every move I made was part of a plan Daniel Cross would never see coming. But even then, as I left the building and glanced up at the glowing Titan logo against the night sky, something in my gut twisted. Because I knew once this started, there'd be no going back. They say you can judge a man's character by how he treats people who can't do anything for him. If that's true, then Daniel Cross was a walking red flag in a three-piece suit. The weeks after Project Horizon's launch were chaos wrapped in champagne. The office was buzzing press releases, congratulatory emails, corporate handshakes. Everyone was calling Daniel a genius. He soaked it all up like a celebrity on a red carpet. But beneath the polished surface, something was off. It started with the small things. Missing documents. Quiet conversations that stopped the second I walked into a room. A few unexplained client meetings Daniel attended without telling anyone. Normally, he'd brag about every deal he made. Now, he was silent, and that silence was louder than his arrogance. One night, I stayed late again, trying to reconcile numbers that didn't add up. When I emailed Daniel for clarification, I got a reply 5 minutes later. Handle it. You're authorized. No explanation. No instructions. Just handle it. That phrase haunted me. A few days later, I noticed his new assistant Chloe. Young, sharp, unnervingly confident. She had started only a month ago but already had clearance to access files even department heads couldn't open. Daniel treated her differently, too differently. He'd praise her ideas in meetings, interrupt others to spotlight her, and even started delegating sensitive financial work to her that used to be mine. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Bosses favored people all the time. But when I saw Chloe leaving his office one evening, smiling while tucking a thick envelope into her purse, the knot in my stomach tightened. Something was happening behind those glass doors. The following Monday, Daniel called an emergency meeting. He strode in, all confidence and cologne, tossing his phone on the table. Team, he announced, we've secured a new investor. A game changer. The room erupted in applause, but I noticed his eyes flick to Chloe just for a second. A look that said we did it. Afterward, I asked him about the investor. Anonymous, he said. Anonymous. I frowned. Since when do anonymous investors pour millions into corporate projects? He smirked. Since I make them believe in me. Don't worry about it, Ethan. You're thinking too small. Thinking too small. That was Daniel's favorite insult. But the red flags kept multiplying. He started canceling board meetings at the last minute, claiming he was working on high-level negotiations. He'd disappear for hours during the day, return with a half-smile, and tell us to trust the process. And yet, payroll started lagging. Expense reimbursements were delayed. One of the accounting interns whispered to me that some of the company's offshore funds weren't showing up in the system. When I asked Daniel, he laughed. Do you question every breeze that passes, Ethan? That's how you lose your balance. It wasn't just business anymore. It was manipulation dressed as mentorship. One Friday, I found him pacing in his office, voice low but urgent. Through the glass wall, I could see him gripping his phone, gesturing sharply. When he noticed me, he ended the call instantly. Everything okay? I asked. Fine, he said too quickly. Just dealing with idiots. He smiled, but his jaw was tight. His charm had cracks now thin, jagged lines forming beneath the surface. That night, I stayed behind again. The office was dark, just the glow of monitors and the city stretching below. I checked the company's internal drives, following a hunch I couldn't explain. And there it was, a newly created folder under Chloe's account, Horizon Assets. Locked, encrypted, hidden in plain sight. Curiosity 1. I ran a decryption attempt. What I found wasn't massive, just a few spreadsheets, but they were enough to raise every alarm in my head. Transfers to consulting firms I'd never heard of. Payments labeled strategic outsourcing with no project codes. Every transaction was small enough to avoid detection, but together, they formed a pattern. It wasn't proof yet, but it was smoke. And where there's smoke. By the next morning, I could barely focus. I sat through Daniel's pep talk like a ghost. Every smile he gave felt rehearsed, every joke hollow. I'd once admired him, hell, I'd modeled myself after him. But now, every word he spoke made my skin crawl. I started documenting things quietly: emails, transaction logs, meeting notes. If this went south, I needed protection. And yet, part of me still wanted to be wrong. Because if Daniel was really what I suspected, then everything I'd built at Titan, every late night, every sacrifice was just fuel for his empire of lies. Later that week, he called me in again. "You've been quiet lately, Ethan," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You losing faith in me?" I met his eyes. "Just focused on the numbers." He smirked. "Good. That's why I keep you around. You clean up my messes." The words hit harder than he intended. Clean up my messes. He meant it as a joke, but I knew it wasn't one. As I walked out, I saw Chloe slipping into his office again, door closing behind her. And for the first time, I didn't feel envy or confusion. I felt certainty. Something dark was brewing inside Titan Solutions. And Daniel Cross, the man who thought he could control everyone, was digging his own grave, one arrogant decision at a time. I just didn't know then how deep I'd have to let him fall before he finally saw it. They say betrayal doesn't come from your enemies, it comes from the people who smile while holding the knife. Daniel Cross smiled like that every day. By the time the first quarter reports rolled in, Titan Solutions was on fire, at least on paper. Revenue had doubled. Investors were ecstatic. Daniel strutted through the office like a peacock in a power suit. But the numbers didn't make sense. I knew because I'd built those reports. And the version Daniel presented to the board wasn't mine. He'd changed them. Entire revenue streams had been inflated, cost margins erased, and non-existent contracts added as secured clients. I sat in that boardroom, watching him give the speech I'd written, only with every line twisted into a lie. The applause that followed felt like thunder in my ears. After the meeting, I confronted him in his office. "Daniel," I said quietly, closing the door, "where did those numbers come from?" He didn't even look up from his laptop. "They came from you, Ethan. You're my data guy." "No," I snapped. "Not those numbers. You doctored them. You're showing false revenue projections. If this gets audited..." He slammed his laptop shut and stood up slowly, that smug, venomous smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "Listen to me," he said, stepping closer. "You work for me. You don't question me." "You're putting both of us at risk," I said. "The shareholders are sheep," he cut in. "And I'm the shepherd. Do you think they care how the numbers look as long as they're profitable?" My chest tightened. "You forged company reports, Daniel. That's not ambition, it's fraud." He laughed. "Big word, Ethan. Be careful how you use it." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You've signed every file I've ever sent up the chain. If this ship goes down, you're the one wearing the anchor." My stomach dropped. In that moment, it hit me, every adjustment, every favor, every creative interpretation he'd asked me to make over the last 2 years, it wasn't trust. It was entrapment. He'd been building his empire on my signature. My reputation. My name. I walked out of his office without a word. My hands were shaking, my vision blurred with rage and disbelief. For months, I'd told myself Daniel's arrogance was just ego, but this wasn't arrogance anymore. This was deliberate. Cold. Calculated. He wasn't just using me. He was setting me up to take the fall. That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt smaller than ever, just the hum of the fridge and the echo of Daniel's voice in my head. "You're the one wearing the anchor." I stared at the files on my laptop. Every signature, every email chain, every approval stamp, they all led to me. He'd made sure of it. By morning, I was back at the office, running on caffeine and anger. I needed proof, something that tied the fraud directly to him. Something that could show I was just the pawn in his game. When I checked the shared drive, the Horizon Assets folder was gone. Deleted. Not archived, not moved, erased. Chloe's access log had vanished too. I felt my throat tighten. He was covering his tracks. Then came the breaking point. Midweek, an internal memo circulated. Titan's compliance department had flagged discrepancies in multiple accounts. Nothing public yet, but it was serious enough that the CFO wanted a quiet review. And guess whose name was on every transaction list? Mine. My phone buzzed with an email from Daniel. "Keep calm. I'll handle this. Don't talk to anyone until I tell you. Handle this." I could almost hear him laughing when he wrote it. I went straight to his office. He was on a call, but when he saw me, he put on that same fake smile. Relax, Ethan. You're panicking. Why is my name on every flagged account? I demanded. He leaned back, tapping his pen against his desk. Because you approved the transfers. You told me to. He shrugged. You're an adult. You could have said no. I felt my chest burn. You used me as your cover, Daniel. You stole from the company and made it look like I did it. He smirked. Correction, I built the company. You're just upset you didn't think bigger. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. You're going to destroy everything. He chuckled softly. No, Ethan. You will if you don't stay quiet. He stood up, walked over, and straightened my tie like a father fixing his son's collar. You're loyal, he said in that condescending tone. Don't ruin that now. Take the heat, and I'll make sure you're taken care of later. A promotion, maybe. More money. That's what you wanted, right? For a second, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't arrogance anymore, it was pure evil. I pushed his hand away and walked out before I did something I'd regret. My heart was pounding, my vision tunneling with fury. By the time I reached my desk, I knew two things for certain. Daniel Cross had betrayed me completely. He believed he'd gotten away with it. As I sat staring at my monitor, I felt the rage settle into something sharper, calm, cold, precise. He thought I'd break. He thought I'd panic. But the truth was, he'd just handed me the blueprint to his own destruction. From that day on, I stopped working for Daniel. I started working against him. He'd used my name to build his empire. Now, I'd use his arrogance to burn it down. And the best part? He'd never see it coming because I'd let him destroy himself, piece by piece. The morning after Daniel's betrayal, I didn't go to work right away. For the first time in years, I just sat on my balcony, staring at the skyline. The same city that had once felt like opportunity now looked like a battlefield. My phone buzzed non-stop, emails, messages from coworkers, even a text from HR asking me to come in for clarification. It didn't take a genius to know what that meant. Daniel was already spinning his story. I felt hollow. Betrayed. Used. I kept replaying that moment in his office, his smug grin, his hand fixing my tie like I was his puppet. Every word he said echoed in my head, you're the one wearing the anchor. He wasn't just arrogant. He was deliberate. He'd spent years building me up just to make me his scapegoat. For a while, I thought about running. Just quitting Titan Solutions and disappearing before the fallout hit. But the thought made me sick. Why should I run? Why should he walk away clean? That's when something shifted inside me. It wasn't loud, or dramatic, just a quiet, burning realization. He had built his power on my loyalty. So what happens when that loyalty turns into his undoing? When I finally walked into the office, I felt every pair of eyes on me. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People looked away when I passed. The rumor mill was already spinning at full speed. At my desk, I found a folder waiting, an internal notice from compliance. Formal investigation pending. My name stamped on every page. And right at the bottom, a note written in Daniel's handwriting. We'll fix this together. Trust me. I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I laughed, a bitter, exhausted sound that didn't even feel like me. Trust him? Never again. Later that day, I met with HR and the CFO for a routine review. Daniel was there too, of course, all calm and composed. Ethan's one of my best, he told them. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Every lie that dripped from his mouth made my skin crawl. He knew exactly what he'd done, and yet he spoke with that same charm that had fooled everyone for years. By the end of the meeting, the CFO smiled sympathetically. We'll sort this out internally, he said. Daniel, thank you for being proactive. Proactive. That's what they called him while I sat there, being quietly marked as the problem. When the meeting ended, Daniel clapped my back and whispered, told you I'd handle it. That was my breaking point. That night, I didn't go home. I went to a quiet cafe down the street from Titan's headquarters, opened my laptop, and started digging. If Daniel had used me as his shield, I'd use everything I knew about him as my weapon. I'd been his right-hand man for years. I knew his habits, his shortcuts, his backdoors into company systems. He wasn't careful because he never thought anyone could outsmart him. And arrogance? That's the easiest weakness to exploit. As I sifted through old backups, I found something he'd overlooked: a cloud sync folder from 6 months ago. It contained draft contracts, emails, even scanned copies of offshore agreements. At first, it was just fragments. But then I found it, a transfer receipt from a Cayman account. The funds had come directly from Titan's operating budget, routed through a shell company under Chloe's name. That was it. The smoking gun. He wasn't just lying to the company, he was siphoning corporate money through fake firms, using me to authorize the transactions, and funneling it offshore. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands trembling. The proof was real. My name was all over it, but so was his. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel powerless. I felt focused. If Daniel wanted me to take the fall, I'd give him exactly what he wanted. But not the way he expected. The next morning, I walked into the office early, calm and collected. Daniel was already there, pacing near the window with his phone. He turned when he saw me, smirking. "Rough week," he said. "Don't worry, I'll make sure you come out of this fine. Just, stay in line." I smiled faintly. "Of course. I trust you." It was the first true lie I'd ever told him. Inside, my plan was already forming. I'd feed his ego, make him believe I was still the obedient employee, the one too scared to fight back. Meanwhile, I'd build my case quietly, layer by layer, until the truth buried him alive. But revenge wasn't the only thing fueling me anymore. I realized something as I watched him stand there in his expensive suit, pretending to be the hero of his own story. I had spent years being afraid of losing everything. My career, my reputation, his approval. But when you've already been destroyed, fear stops being a cage. It becomes fuel. He took my trust and weaponized it. Now, I'd take his arrogance and make it his downfall. That night, as I walked out of the building, I paused to look up at the massive Titan logo glowing against the dark sky. For years, that symbol had meant success. Now, it was just a reminder of everything false, everything Daniel built on deceit. But soon, it would all come crashing down. And the beauty of it? He'd never realize I was the one pulling the strings until it was too late. I learned quickly that the best revenge looks exactly like business as usual. If Daniel was going to eat arrogance for breakfast, he needed to be served his own menu, warmed, plated, and presented with a smile. So I dressed my plan in spreadsheets and polite emails, the only language he respected. Step 1. Secure the proof. I copied everything. Not just the obvious files, the ones he could claim were old versions or mislabeled, but the hidden threads, metadata, IP logs, timestamps, device IDs. I pulled archived backups from my personal encrypted drive. I'd been making routine backups for years, habit became blessing. Then I duplicated them on a thumb drive locked in my apartment safe and uploaded encrypted copies to an anonymous cloud account. If Titan scrubbed its servers, the trail would still exist outside his reach. Step 2. Bait the arrogance. Daniel loved control and applause. So I fed him both. I leaked, anonymously, a rumor about a phantom investor who only dealt with one kind of clean paperwork that required a fresh round of discretionary transfers and offshore routing. Daniel couldn't help himself. He saw a tax-free jackpot and dove in. I watched him through the habits I knew so well, the late-night calls, the sudden meetings with Chloe, the signatures that flowed like clockwork. Step 3. Set traps inside the fortress. Chloe was the weak link. She wanted Daniel's approval the way others wanted breath-eager, hungry, unguarded. I started assigning her minor tasks that needed Daniel's sign-off. When she carried documents to him, she left her access log open. I set up decoy spreadsheets with tiny, deliberate anomalies, project codes that looked legit but would trip compliance algorithms if audited. Each decoy was a tripwire. When it was touched, the system generated alerts with timestamps tied to Daniel's devices. Step 4. Make it traceable. Arrogant men don't cover their tracks well, they cover them prettily. Daniel routed money through shell names, but he used the same VPN cluster twice. He reused vendor descriptions. Little fingerprints he assumed were invisible, the same phrase in 3 emails, a signature font on PDF invoices became markers I could tie together. I cross-referenced bank transfers with login IPs and calendar entries. A vendor payment listed as consulting matched a luncheon on Daniel's calendar. Patterns emerged like constellations. Once you connect them, you can't unknow the picture. Step 5. Control perception. If this went public, the board would panic faster than the press. So I built a quiet exit route, anonymous tips to compliance and a sealed packet to the CFO's personal inbox. I framed the information as concern for the company, no emotion, no accusations, only the facts and a request for an internal forensic review. That way, if Daniel tried to spin, the narrative would already be in professional hands. I also created a shadow narrative, subtle messages to a few trusted colleagues warning them to keep copies of their work and to avoid signing off on any Horizon addendums without full documentation. I needed allies who hadn't been compromised. Step 6. Protect myself legally and emotionally. I made sure every authorization that bore my name had a clear paper trail showing it had been requested, that the requester's account was Daniel's, and that, in several cases, I had expressly documented my concerns. I prepared a ledger of past creative approvals Daniel had demanded, with dates and timestamps. If they wanted to hang a scapegoat, the scaffold would reveal a carpenter with Daniel's fingerprints. Step 7. The silent nudge. The most delicate move was psychological. I began returning Daniel's condescension with overeager compliance. I complimented his intuition in meetings, praised Chloe's initiative, and recommended he take the lead on the new investor outreach he'd been whispering about. Each compliment reinforced his belief that I was still playing his game. Arrogance makes you sloppy, flattery makes you blind. All the while, he strutted through the office like a man who owned the weather. He bragged about new deals in the elevator, signed paperwork with neat, confident strokes, and sometimes, in the quiet of his office, he sang under his breath the same songs of invincibility he'd hummed for years. He still felt in control. Perfect. But control is an illusion when the ground is hollowed out beneath you. 2 weeks into the plan, the traps began to twitch. A routine compliance script flagged an off-pattern transfer, a small $60,000 routing to a shell labeled Horizon Consulting. It matched one of my decoy codes. The system generated a red flag. At the same time, Chloe's access logs pinged from a machine she never used. The vendor's email bounced from a registered domain that had been dormant for months. Daniel didn't notice yet. He kept smiling at the coffee machine, telling the VP of sales how the new investor would change everything. His hands were stained with the ink of his own signatures, and he believed them to be clean. I watched him from my desk, heart beating like a metronome, waiting for the crescendo. Every successful trap felt like a note tuned to one pitch, the collapse I'd promised myself the night I refused to be his scapegoat. There was a risk, of course. One misstep and I'd be the one dragged under. But I had already been burned. The only real question now was whether I would let the flames finish me or use them to forge something else. Monday morning's board review loomed. The packed room, the polished faces, the smiling press, everything Daniel loved. It was the perfect stage. I shut my laptop, tucked the encrypted thumb drive into my jacket, and walked toward the elevator. I could feel the heat of the coming storm in my chest. He still thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The morning of the board review felt like walking onto a stage with the lights turned up so bright they burned your eyes. Titan's glass conference room was full. Board members, legal counsel, the CFO, and the CEO who thought he'd already won. Cameras weren't yet here, but whispers moved like a current under the polished table. Daniel walked in like a man who believed in miracle finishes. He didn't notice my jaw was steady, my hands calm. Confidence is contagious, so is collapse. The CFO opened the meeting. "We've initiated a routine forensic audit," she said. "There are a number of irregularities that require executive-level review." She didn't look at Daniel. She looked at me. Daniel's face was the exact color of commerce, smooth, then suddenly paper-thin. "This is absurd," he said. "We have records. Everything is above board." He smiled the way predators smile at prey they think can't bite back. That was when I stood. I didn't walk to the front, I stepped into the light. "As compliance flagged," I said, "I want to present what I found." I set my laptop on the table and, with a click, projected the first slide, a map of transfers, dates, and vendor names. The room went silent in the kind of way that prefaces thunder. Slide 2, Metadata. IP addresses, login timestamps, device IDs. Slide 3, Matching calendar entries. Lunch with a vendor, a meeting timestamp during a day Daniel claimed he was at a conference. Slide 4, the decoy codes he touched, each flagged by the system I'd set up as tripwires. Daniel laughed, brittle. "Where did you get that?" "From Titan's systems," I said. "And from backups you didn't think anyone would check." I clicked again and dropped the bomb, a recording. It didn't look like much in the beginning, just a compressed file. But when the audio played, Daniel's voice filled the room, rooted through Horizon Consulting. Make it look operational. Ethan will sign it, he's dependable. The sentence landed like a brick. Chloe's face went white. Daniel's expression, for the first time in years, wasn't calculated, it was raw panic. Where did you get that? He barked. Who gave you? You gave it, I said. You sent it from your work line to Chloe. You copied me on the follow-up. You signed the vendor contracts in your handwriting. You routed the funds through the shell accounts registered under names that all trace back to your home address. The legal counsel mouthed the word forgery as if testing its weight. The CFO's hands were already moving. She picked up her phone. The mood shifted from boardroom politeness to procedural urgency. Daniel tried to spin. He produced falsified invoices and a glossy PowerPoint of fake clients. He called me names, accused me of making the whole thing up to sabotage him. His voice rose, then cracked. He pleaded for the board's faith like a man bargaining for oxygen. Then the door opened. 2 men in plain suits stepped in, agents from the regulator, their badges discreet but unmistakable. We received an anonymous tip with supporting documentation, one said, setting a file on the table. We're here to secure records and ask questions. The room tilted. Daniel's eyes darted to the door as if expecting reinforcements that never came. The regulator's men reviewed the evidence I'd fed quietly to compliance days earlier, the anonymous packet, the encrypted cloud copies, the thumb drive in my pocket. They cross-checked bank traces and vendor registrations. Each link fell into place like a puzzle solved by a patient child. Chloe, trembling now, broke. He told me to do it, she whispered. He told me it was temporary, just moving funds for liquidity. He said it would come back. Her voice found a pitch between confession and pleading. She produced her phone. There were messages, orders, approvals, and a black and white screenshot of Daniel's instruction, do it tonight. Don't tell Ethan yet. The hole in his story widened into a canyon. Daniel's arrogance evaporated into the kind of silence that can't be bought. He tried a last, desperate ploy, blaming me outright, accusing me of jealousy, of fabricating evidence. The regulator asked to access his devices. They saw email threads, VPN logs routed through familiar clusters, signatures matching the fraudulent invoices. Daniel Cross, the lead agent, said, "You're under investigation for corporate fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud shareholders. You are not free to leave." The words landed like a judge's hammer. He sat down. The man who'd swaggered into every room convinced of his infallibility now stared at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Reporters would later call the image cinematic, the titan reduced to a man waiting for cuffs. For me, it looked less poetic and more inevitable. As handcuffs clicked, Daniel's eyes found mine. For a second, just a single breath, there was recognition, not of me as the architect of his downfall, but of his own reflection in the ruin. There was no grand apology. No tearful acceptance. Only the quiet that follows the collapse of someone who misread the world as his stage. People around us exhaled. Some applauded in relief, others looked away, disturbed by how closely they'd once stood to the edge. Chloe wept openly, then composed herself and began answering the regulator's questions. The board moved swiftly, emergency executive sessions, a press statement, legal containment. Titan stock would open to chaos in the morning. Outside, the first flashes of camera light began to appear on the street below. The city felt suddenly smaller, the news cycle already circling like sharks. I left the conference room the way I'd entered, calm, steady, anonymous, because the work wasn't done. Justice would decide the rest. But as Daniel was led away, his shoulders hunched, his pride stripped down, I felt something else settle in my chest, not triumphant gloating, but a fragile, fierce sense of closure. He'd used my name as armor. Tonight, the armor clattered to the floor, and his reflection shattered across 100 tiny truths he'd never wanted anyone to see. The news broke like thunder. Titan Corp CFO arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The headline flooded every major outlet before noon. Daniel Cross, once the golden boy of corporate leadership, the man whose arrogance towered higher than the skyscraper we worked in, was now a fallen empire in a $2,000 suit. For years, he'd built his image on charm and control. But now, his photos told a different story, his once perfect posture replaced with slumped shoulders, his confident smirk replaced by an empty stare. The man who thought he was untouchable had become the cautionary tale every intern whispered about. When I walked back into the office the next morning, it wasn't quiet. It was reverent. People stopped what they were doing. They didn't clap, but their nods said everything. I wasn't invisible anymore. The same colleagues who'd once looked away when Daniel talked over me now sought me out, shook my hand, thanked me for having the courage to do what they never could. "Ethan, you really did it," one of the junior analysts said. "You took down Goliath." I smiled faintly. "He just threw the stone himself. I only made sure it hit." Over the next few weeks, Titan Corp rebuilt slowly, painfully, but honestly this time. The board reinstated me, not as the quiet project manager I'd once been, but as interim operations head. "You've already proven your integrity," the CFO told me. "Now prove what leadership looks like." And I did. I made sure every new hire knew what transparency really meant. I turned Daniel's department, once a fortress of fear, into a glass room of accountability. No locked door meetings. No secret deals. No voices drowned by arrogance. For the first time, people spoke freely without watching over their shoulders. But poetic justice isn't just about rebuilding what was broken, it's about watching the one who tried to destroy you crumble under the weight of their own ego. Daniel's trial was live-streamed 3 months later. He came in wearing a grey suit and a smirk that cracked halfway through the proceedings. The prosecutors laid out everything: his fake vendors, his falsified audits, his offshore accounts. And then they played the recording. The room went dead silent. His voice echoed again, "Ethan will sign it. He's dependable." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd mocked my loyalty had turned it into his downfall. His words, the ones he used to manipulate, control, and demean, became the very evidence that buried him. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, I didn't celebrate. I just watched. I watched him glance toward the back of the courtroom, searching for someone who might still believe in him. But no one did. Not Chloe. Not the board. Not even the reporters who once praised him. He was utterly, perfectly alone. Later that day, as I left the courthouse, a journalist called out, "Ethan, any comment on Daniel Cross's conviction?" I stopped for a moment, the autumn air sharp against my face. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. "Just one thing," I said quietly. "Arrogance destroys faster than truth ever could. He didn't lose because I exposed him. He lost because he thought he couldn't be exposed." The quote ran everywhere that night. And for once, I didn't mind. Weeks turned into months. Titan Corp stabilized. I earned the full promotion not because I'd taken someone down, but because I'd stood up. My leadership wasn't built on fear, but on proof that power means nothing without integrity. Sometimes, late at night, I'd pass the glass wall where Daniel's corner office once stood. It had been cleared out, stripped bare. But in the reflection, I could still see the ghost of that arrogant smile, and then my own, calm and steady, staring back. That was enough closure for me. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something better: peace. Still, poetic justice has its own rhythm. Daniel was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, with restitution to every shareholder he'd defrauded. He'd gone from flying first class to wearing a state-issued number. Word spread that he was assigned to the prison's accounting department. The irony? He now balanced other people's books. That was justice, not just poetic, but perfect. Because in the end, Daniel destroyed himself exactly as I'd let him. I didn't push him off the cliff. I simply stepped aside and let his arrogance carry him over. And as for me, I learned something powerful: revenge doesn't always require a sword. Sometimes it's enough to hand a man his own reflection and let him choke on the truth. Movie camera, speaking directly to viewers. So, what do you think? Have you ever watched someone's arrogance bring about their own downfall? Have you ever had to stay silent, waiting for the truth to reveal itself? Tell me in the comments, I read every single one. Speech balloon. And if you love stories where karma hits like thunder, subscribe, because trust me, justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it whispers.